about bringing in very high quality Japanese into an organization. When you bring people in, you also, of course, have to worry about the transition. And it's important to have ownership on the part of the other managers in the organization. So at some point, I think it's a good idea to have your Japanese managers obviously meet him and to basically agree that they can work with him. Likewise, it's good for the candidate to meet the other managers that he will have to work with. Again, on the role of the contract, one of the important features in Japan is this concept of the dual economy, or that some employees are on contracts, and then you have your regular employees. And actually, the presence of employees on contracts always maintain the privileged position of the regular employees who were the union members. And employees on contracts traditionally were not union members, the temporary employees. So for marginal positions, it can make sense to have temporaries. And very few foreign firms have really gotten into that concept. Lifetime employment and seniority wages can only work if you keep taking in new, cheap, young people, right? That's the only way you can possibly pay older employees and give them an incremental increase each year. And you only have a successful company when there is growth in the company. But if individuals in a company see that there is a large surplus of mid-career types, people from 40 to 50, and that it will in fact become impossible to become a Torishimaryaku or a director. I mean, one of the great pulls in Japanese companies was the hope that you could become president maybe the first year you were in, and then about the second year becoming more realistic and seeing, well, okay, maybe just a director, maybe a bucho, maybe a home bucho. But you know, in the old days, just about all four-year university graduates got to become bucho, and I mean like 20 years ago. Or at least, you know, they take care of them, you know, fukubucho, bucho taigu, you know. Not really a bucho, but we'll treat you like one. We won't quite pay you like one. So I think when they see all that, they see that, yeah, it's not quite the way it was before. And they see that companies like Hitachi Zosen, you know, getting rid of 3,500 employees, closing down the island, and New Japan Steel. I mean, New Japan Steel was the company. It was before that, though, obviously you had textiles. Before that, you had paper and pulp here in Japan. That was king, and Toyota and Nissan then became king. But look what's happening there. So when they see that, obviously, yeah, I think everything changes. I mean, I hadn't really thought about that, but sure, Peter, everything would change, and they would say, yeah, okay, the foreign company, maybe it's not a household word. That's really the key, isn't it? It's not a question of being a foreign company. It's a question of size. It's a question of scale, isn't it? It's got nothing to do with really being foreign. In fact, given the same company with 50 or 60 employees, a foreign company and a Japanese company, I think that the foreign company has a better chance of bringing a man in than the Japanese company, right? At least with a foreign company, you'll pay the lump sum retirement benefit if you have to pull out of Japan, which a Japanese company won't even pay. You know, they just close up shop. And they call it taishokukin tosan, right? Lump sum, you know, retirement benefit. They can't come through on that liability. They haven't funded it, and they just close up, and the employees get nothing. You know, there are rugs on the floor. There's attractive furniture. There are possibilities of maybe working in another country. So I think, yeah, I think it will change. You know, it will be changing. But it's not a question of being foreign as much as it is having name recognition. Eh? To get into, say, a major Japanese company means that you made the grade. So I think it's still a good idea for, in one sense, for graduates to do that, and then to move into the foreign company after that. Because it's unclear really who they were, what they were, where they came from, unless they got into the major firm. So, you know, I mean, I would still recommend perhaps that Japanese have their sons start off with one of them, and then start to get the big bucks and, you know, have a more interesting career in a foreign firm. Yeah, anything else on this area of basically contracts, hiring people? One thing you have to be careful about is if you've got a bonus, if you're paying a bonus in your firm, for example, in your letter to the employee, I think you shouldn't write that, you know, this much income will be paid. What you have to write is that the basic salary is this, or the regular salary is this. These are the allowances. There'll be 12 hits of that. And then in addition to that, in principle, we pay X months of bonus at our firm, but it may be more or less than that, okay? I think that sort of thing would be important. And also, don't define the job itself. Don't define that in the letter of employment, because later on the employee can look at that, and when you want to either have he or her do another job, they'll say, no, I don't have to do that. Or maybe one of your goals for moving them into another job is to maybe move them out because you've sensed that they don't want to do that other job. But in any case, if the contract has defined either place of work or job content, you won't be able to do that. You also want to be careful in your rules of employment not to stipulate that there'll be promotion. In principle, you shouldn't even say in principle there'll be promotion and a pay increase each year. You don't want to write that. You just want to say there'll be a pay adjustment in principle each year. Just one other thing on compensation area to think about now. If you have a Japanese compensation package with family and housing and meal allowances and so on, in many firms, they only made the family allowance, the spouse allowance, and the larger housing allowance available to male employees. Just check that one out, because especially since April 1st, 1986, with the Equal Opportunity Employment Law, if the women want to get those allowances and ask for them, that could be an extra cost to you. So it's better to cash them out into a non-pensionable salary component. Okay. And another thing on compensation, and this gets into work rules too, that by definition there's got to be an overlap on these topics. But there are certain companies that employees apparently can take as many days off for the odd cold or the hangover or whatever it is, saying that they're sick or whatever. And they go beyond paid annual leave. And first of all, most Japanese companies and most multinationals don't provide sick leave here, for the odd day of sick leave. You do have your long-term disability. But you should have an ability to just take that monthly salary and divide by, say, 21 or 22, or the number of working days in that month. And then when they go over the number of paid annual leave days that they have, or sick days, I think it's fair enough to deduct, isn't it, really? I mean, if other employees are coming in every day and working hard, that's something that you can get into, that kind of actually cutting back pay. And we do it at our company. I don't see how you could do it any other way. I just think it's the only fair way to do it. When you have some employees that are always showing up and working hard, it's not fair to have other people getting the same salaries, basically, when they don't show up. Just again on we have to concentrate on the law issues too, and actually it was Lorraine who suggested that I talk quite a lot about the law as well. I mean, I feel that I do know the law, but it's not really, I'm not a lawyer, but overtime, for example, it's legally you have to pay 25% on that. There's no reason to go over a 25% overtime rate. Some multinationals pay 50% because there's, I think, a notion, particularly in America, about time and a half. It would only get to 50% in Japan if an employee worked over 8 hours of actual work, which means 9 hours if you add lunch. In other words, you can work employees from 8 to 5 here or from 9 to 6. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but I think a 7-hour working day is a bit too short. 9 to 5 is a bit too short. And it certainly wouldn't make sense to have your receptionist or your telephone answering service close off at 5 o'clock or 5:30. But there are many companies that have that, and I think it's pretty frustrating to the people dealing with you. So your rates can be 25%, and holiday pay is also, the holiday overtime rate is also 25%. You don't need to pay a holiday overtime rate if you have a kyujitsu furikai or a holiday change clause, which means that essentially you just say that was your holiday, but we're changing it to another day, and then it's not necessary to pay overtime. Now, another major issue on compensation is basically, are you going to Japanize or not, right? Will you divide annual income by 12, or will you pay bonus? And in a Japanese fashion, which is basically on in June and in December, they'll pay anywhere from maybe 4 to 7 or 8 months bonus. The industry average here is 5.8 months. That's the average bonus which is paid in Japan. Now, what are the issues on this? Basically, you should keep in mind that while it may seem more convenient to divide annual income by 12, you're really going to be giving something up. Because, for one thing, you lose the ability to have a performance range on your bonus. You can also easily cut back the bonus amount if the company doesn't do well or if the employee isn't performing. So it's one way to move out a poor performer, for example, to freeze his bonus, not pay him any bonus, or to cut it back significantly. And legally, it's much easier to do that than it would be to cut back his straight pay, okay? Other factors are that you have to weigh the compensation with the lump sum retirement benefit. In Japan, they pay a lump sum retirement benefit of a given number of months of salary for years of service. And it's generally based on final salary here, not an average of, say, the last 5 years' salaries. Now, even the Ministry of Labor provides as a model to foreign companies or in an English publication, as well as to Japanese companies. I mean, a simple standard is 1 month for 1 year of service, okay? The table usually runs up to 40 years. So that would be 1 month, that would be 40 months at 40 years. Now, if you look at your regulations, you'll very likely find that you may go as high as maybe 50 years or 60 years. But it's important to keep in mind that if you're dividing annual income by 12 instead of, say, by 18, just based on the bonus factor, right away your lump sum retirement benefit liability is going to be 50% higher, okay? So if you have the same table in your rules of employment, you know, 1 month for even each year of service, or if you're 40 years at 50 months, another company that has that same table but is dividing by 18 has 50% lower liability on the lump sum retirement benefit. So that's a crucial thing to look at. Other reasons for having a bonus from the employer's point of view would be that the Social Security contributions on bonus amount are about 1/3 that they are on straight monthly salary. Okay? So, in other words, in Japan, when you have over 5 employees, you have to pay unemployment insurance, health insurance, national pension insurance, workers' accident compensation. And all your contributions there are much greater on straight salary than they are on bonus amount. So you're going to be paying more into the government there as well. Employees are beginning to appreciate that annual income divided by 12, but Japanese companies simply don't do that. So you've got to be a bit careful, because if they haven't had it, you can hire a man with a big salary increase, but his monthly take-home will still be less if you're paying bonus. But I think that you've just got to get people to go on board, and I don't think you can grandfather there and make exceptions. And you can begin to sell the bonus idea to employees by saying such things as the following. If we have a very good year and we make a lot of money, we want, rather than have 60% go off to corporate tax, we'd like to pay that to employees. But we can't put it into your regular, more or less guaranteed or straight earnings, because by doing so, you know, we're stuck with it. I mean, we can't possibly consider paying you that much. We happen to have a good year this year, but we don't know about next year. But if you have a bonus, you can easily pay it out in a summer and winter bonus, and the employees can benefit, yet you haven't affected your long-term liabilities or costs. Article 159 of the Corporate Tax Code says that you can't discriminate in compensation, and in fact, when the Tekikaku Nenkin, or this tax-qualified pension law, was set up, it refers to Article 159 of the Corporate Tax Code, which indicates that it will only be accepted by the government. The tax-qualified pension will only be accepted if you don't have that kind of discrimination. So basically, I would say that you shouldn't. But of course, the whole question of labor relations in any country is, you know, you can do almost anything you want unless there's a complaint, right? Or unless there's litigation. So I mean, it could be done. But on the other hand, There was an example of an organization some years ago where when the employees, everyone was paid a bonus. They were dividing by 17 essentially, 5 months bonus. And then all the managers of that particular bank got together, and I guess they decided that they didn't want to do that anymore. And furthermore, the head office said, we don't want to do it for managers. For their reasons, they didn't understand what the implications were. So the managers went along with it, but when the employees found out, they said, we want the same thing. When they couldn't get it, they started a union. So, you know, I think that you have the problems of the realities of an operation and more than really questions of the law. Japanese law essentially says very little per se. I mean, labor standards law says very little about the whole compensation area, except, you know, you have to define a pay date. But for example, the lump sum retirement benefit is not required at all. There's no reason to do anything beyond make your contributions as the employer into the social insurances. And I might add that the minimal contribution, generally 50%, it should be adequate. And it's questionable whether or not it makes sense for you to do 100% on that, because it's not really a strategic issue. I think certainly when you're doing mid-career hires, most employees will decide to join you before they know whether you're paying 100% of the social insurances or not, or before they know whether your lump sum retirement benefit is 40 months, at 40 years, whether it's 40 months or 50 months or 60 months. And they're not going to notice how a lump sum retirement benefit scale is set up. I mean, what's advantageous to an employer, obviously, is to have great acceleration from the 30th to the 40th year, or just keep it flowing. In other words, I think a reasonable program would be one from the first year to the 10th year, 1 month for each year of service. And then you could maybe go up 1.2 months for each year of service incrementally for 5-year periods, 1.3, maybe get up to 1.5, and then from 30 to 40, if you stay at 1.5 or even go up to 2, in reality you won't be paying for that because you won't have employees that are with you for over 30 years. On the other hand, I saw one last week where from the first month, from the first year to the 10th year, it started at 1.5, okay? And then it got as high as 2, basically from about your 15th year to your 25th or 30th year, 2 months of salary for each year of service. And then from the 30th to the 40th, it stayed the same. So, you know, that was totally advantageous to employees, and it was really not at all fair to the employer, which gets into the whole question, you know, in terms of, you know, your strategy on setting up compensation rules of employment. You have to have a certain amount of control on that. That's your job. The employer is free to write up those regulations. Employees don't even have to agree with the contents. They do have to write an Ikensho on rules of employment, or a statement of opinion which gets submitted along with the rules of employment to the Labor Standards Office. But the inspector there will just read that, and he won't necessarily he'll just say, well, maybe you want to talk about this a little bit more, but he's got to pass them. If you're interested, the reality is in Japanese companies, if there was a survey of bonuses done by the Ministry of Labor in 1982, and for managers, the average range of difference between managers on bonus payment was 22%, and for rank and file it was 13%, okay? But that's the average. I mean, that's within a program that it could be total flexibility, or a certain company might have a certain parameter. They might have it. But basically, legally, you have complete flexibility on that. You don't have to pay any Japanese allowances at all, but remember, those allowances are non-pensionable. They're traditional practices that they're not figured into the lump sum retirement benefit, so maybe it's to your advantage to have those allowances in that sense. But another thing you can do to get around that is to simply stipulate in your rules of employment that only, say, 60% of final salary is pensionable, okay? In other words, in a company that's paying no bonus and is dividing annual income by 12, probably, and has no allowances, say, non-pensionable allowances, probably only 50% of that regular monthly cash compensation to be competitive with what with the quality of the lump sum retirement benefit of Japanese companies that are paying a man the same total annual net, probably only 50% should be pensionable. If you've got, say, only 4 months bonus, maybe 60% should be pensionable.